Welcome to the Hidden City Podcast. I'm Grant.
And I'm Doug, and we're here to share some of the incredible stories and people from Oak Cliff that you might not know.
We're going to sit down with some of the visionaries, craftsmen, and business owners who have shaped Oak Cliff into what it is today.
Oak Cliff is on the south bank of the Trinity River, a few miles south of downtown Dallas. While technically it was part of Dallas, it was its own city for a long time, and it still has that independent spirit.
We'll dive into the history and the spirit of this place, exploring the different challenges and successes that defined it.
This is The Hidden City, a podcast about the people and the stories that make Oak Cliff extraordinary.
Dallas is supposed to be flat. That's what people say anyway. Flat roads, flat subdivisions, flat horizons broken by highways, office towers, and the occasional overpass. But then you get to Stevens Park. You stand on an elevated T with downtown Dallas rising in the distance. The grounds fall away beneath you. Coombs Creek cuts through the course. A fairway bends around trees and disappears behind a bluff. And suddenly, Dallas does not feel flat at all. It feels folded, uneven, and almost secret. Stevens Park Golf Course has been called Little Augusta. You can understand the comparison. The old trees, the elevation changes, the carefully framed views, the way the course feels separated from the city, even while the skyline is still sitting there right in front of you. But Stevens Park is not a miniature copy of the famous private club in Georgia. It's a story much more Oak Cliff than that. It's a public golf course built on difficult land cut from creeks, gullies, limestone bluffs, and property lines that never made anything easy. And that difficulty became the entire point. The holes had to climb, fall, cross water, squeeze between streets, and follow the shape of western Oak Cliff. And behind the course was a woman named Annie L. Stevens. In 1923, Annie gave Dallas part of her family's land as a memorial to her parents. She was not simply handing over a beautiful parcel of land and walking away. She was also helping create the conditions for a new neighborhood around it. The park was a memorial, but it was also leverage.
That gift became one of Dallas's earliest municipal golf courses. It opened with 9 holes and sand greens. It was too small almost immediately. The city had to acquire more land, alter boundaries, move roads, rebuild creek banks, and keep adapting the course through the Depression, war, segregation, neighborhood growth, decline, and renewal. And through all of that, Stevens Park became more than just a place to play golf. It became a training ground for generations of Oak Cliff golfers, a place where high schoolers could become national champions, a place where women competed, a place where African-American golfers crossed one of Dallas's color lines, run, picnic, and sled when it snows, and stop simply to look at downtown. Near the 6th tee stands a marker for the failed French colony of La Réunion. So one patch of public ground holds 2 very different Oak Cliff dreams, a European utopia that disappeared, and a municipal golf course that refused to.
This is the story of Stevens Park. The stubborn land gift, the little public course on the bluffs, and the piece of Dallas that proves the city was never as flat as people thought. A lot of people in Oak Cliff know Stevens Park without necessarily knowing its history. Some know it because they play golf there. Others know it because it's the green space between Kessler Park, Stevens Park Estates, and Colorado Boulevard. They know the stone walls and the trees and the bridges and the views across the river. And if you have children in Oak Cliff, you may know it as one of the first places everyone thinks about when Dallas gets a half an inch of snow. It's one of those places that feels like it's always been there. The neighborhood curves around it, backyards open toward it, streets rise above it and disappear behind its hills. The course and the surrounding homes feel like part of the same landscape. But that relationship was designed, not all at once and not neatly. Stevens Park grew out of family history, real estate ambition, public recreation, city planning, and a landscape that kept forcing everyone to change the plan.
So how did a 40-acre memorial become an 18-hole course? Why was the public golf important to Oak Cliff? And how did Stevens Park help create a neighborhood around it? And why did this course produce such an extraordinary group of golfers? This is not only a golf story, it is a story about how a city builds itself around difficult ground.
Before there was Stevens Park, there was Stevens family land. Dr. John H. Stevens and his wife Mary owned a substantial piece of the high ground west of the Trinity River. Their property covered land that would later become the golf course, Stevens Park, and the portion of the surrounding neighborhoods. Their children included Walter and Annie Stevens, and Annie would become central to what happened next.
Annie never married and had no children. She inherited property and took an active role in managing it. The surviving accounts do not describe someone passively holding family acreage while Dallas grew around her. Annie understood what that growth meant. Oak Cliff had joined Dallas in 1903, but large portions of west of the river still lacked the streets, utilities, and civic improvements needed for major residential development. If the remaining Stevens land was going to become a desirable neighborhood, the city had to come closer.
One way to bring the city closer was to give it something. On December 4th, 1923, Annie transferred approximately 40 acres to Dallas as a memorial to her parents. This memorial purpose was real, but the gift also fit a larger development strategy. Historical accounts connect the arrangement to the extension of roads and utilities towards the Stevens property: water, sewer, electricity, gas, and access. Dallas received the public land. The surrounding Stevens property became easier to develop.
Annie understood something city builders have always understood. A park does not only preserve land, it changes the value and identity of everything around it. Put a public landscape beside a residential development and you are not simply giving people recreation, you are giving a neighborhood a center and a reason for more people to imagine themselves living there.
So Stevens Park begins as two things at once: a memorial to Annie's parents and a move in a larger development plan. There was one immediate problem with Annie's gift. 40 acres was not enough. It was nowhere near enough for a conventional 18-hole golf course, and it was barely enough for 9. And even that depended on what you were willing to call a golf hole.
The land was irregular. Coombs Creek and smaller drainage channels cut through it. There were steep grades, rocky areas, trees, gullies, roadways, and awkward boundaries. This was not an empty rectangle where someone could draw fairways in neat parallel lines. It was a landscape with opinions.
But Dallas wanted municipal golf. The game was growing rapidly in the early 20th century. Private country clubs served people who could afford membership. A municipal course offered a different model, accessible to more people. People who wanted to play but did not belong to a private club. And so Oak Cliff civic leaders wanted a course on their side of the river.
John Fouts was one of the people pushing hardest. Fouts was an educator, coach, and Oak Cliff civic leader. He helped organize support and raise money. Park board members S.E. Moss also became an important advocate. Together with the Stevens family and other residents, they helped turn a land gift into an actual golf project.
In 1924, Dallas brought in 2 golf professionals to help lay out its new municipal course: Jack Burke Sr. and Sid Cooper. This was before golf course architecture became the highly specialized profession it is today. Designing a course could mean walking the land, choosing the corridors, driving stakes into the ground, and supervising local crews. Burke and Cooper had to find golf holes inside the landscape that already existed.
The first version was rough. Stevens Park opened in 1924 as a 9-hole course with sand putting greens, not sand traps. The actual greens were prepared sand surfaces that had to be smoothed before players putted on them. It sounded primitive now, but sand greens were common in dry regions and on courses that could not yet afford irrigation for maintenance required for grass. The important thing was that Oak Cliff finally had a public golf course.
But almost immediately, everyone could see the course needed more room. The original property lines were revised, the city acquired additional land, and roads and boundaries were changed. The gift did not arrive as a finished park. The city and the neighborhood kept stretching until it could become one. To understand why Stevens Park looks the way it does, you also have to understand George Kessler. Kessler was the landscape architect and city planner who produced an ambitious plan for Dallas in 1911. Dallas had grown quickly and awkwardly. The Trinity flooded, rail lines cut through the city, streets were disconnected, parks existed as isolated pieces rather than a coordinated system. Kessler proposed boulevards, parkways, green belts, and connected public spaces that could give the structure to the growth.
A lot of the plan was considered unrealistic. That happens often with city plans. People admire the drawings, argue about the costs, implement a few pieces, and leave the rest for another generation. But Kessler's ideas remained influential, especially in Oak Cliff. He understood that the creeks, bluffs, and flood-prone land around the Trinity did not have to be treated only as obstacles. They could become the framework for parks and roads.
Coombs Creek was central to that idea. Instead of forcing a rigid street grid across every slope and drainage system, streets could bend with the land. Green space could remain connected, and the difficult terrain could become an amenity.
That is why the relationship between Stevens Park and the neighborhoods around it feels so natural today. It's beautifully done, and that was an intentional choice. The streets curve, the lots adjust to the slopes, the course follows the creek, trees, yards, stone walls, fairways, and public green space flow into one another. The course helped preserve the creek corridor. The creek corridor gave the course its shape, and the surrounding development borrowed prestige from both. This was not a neighborhood laid across a blank grid with leftover land turned into a park. Here's the landscape coming first. Everything else negotiated with it.
Kessler died in 1923 before Stevens Park opened, but the course became one of the clearest local expressions of his larger idea. Let the natural ground organize the city. A lot of golf courses try very hard to look natural. They move enormous amounts of dirt, build artificial hills, plant mature trees, and shape ponds until the finished course appears to have been discovered rather than constructed. Stevens Park had the opposite problem. There was already too much happening. Hills, creeks, bluffs and trees, roads, small parcels, and neighborhood edges. The designers did not need to invent drama. They needed to fit a golf course inside of it.
Early descriptions make the course sound almost mischievous. Players had to shape shots around trees and slopes. Some holes favored a hook, others demanded a fade. A straight shot was not always the correct shot. The landscape constantly interfered with the uncomplicated way a golfer might prefer to play. If you have played hole 16, you know what I'm talking about. And that is what gives an old municipal course character. It's not enormous. It was not built with unlimited land or unlimited money. It is full of compromises. But after enough time, those compromises stop feeling like flaws and start feeling like a course personality. A fairway bends because the creek was already there. A green sits in an angle because the bluff would not allow anything else. A tee rises above the landing area because that was the usable ground the city had.
And then there are the views. Downtown does not remain in front of you throughout the entire round. It arrives. You turn a corner, you climb, and trees open, and suddenly the skyline appears across the Trinity. The course makes downtown feel less like the center of Dallas and more like another landscape feature. While Dallas was expanding the course, Annie and Walter Stevens were developing the land around it. Stevens Park Estates began taking shape in the 1920s, and the golf course became a central part of the sales pitch. Imagine looking for a home in Dallas at that moment. The city is expanding, automobiles are changing how far people can live from downtown, new subdivisions are competing for buyers. And here's a neighborhood on elevated ground overlooking a public park and a golf course, connected to downtown but separated from it by the river and creeks and winding streets. It was a great setup.
The development used deed restrictions and architectural standards to establish an upscale identity. Streets followed the contours, land adjusted to the hills, and small parks appeared within the neighborhood. The public landscape and private development reinforced one another. And this is where Annie's arrangement looks especially smart. The city received a park, the public received recreation, and Oak Cliff received infrastructure and a civic investment.
What has survived here for so long was an unusually open relationship between neighborhood and course. Stevens Park is not hidden behind a wall. Homes look onto it. Streets pass beside it and through it. People who have never played golf still experience it as a part of the neighborhood. The course helped create the neighborhood, and for a century, the neighborhood has repeatedly helped protect the course. Public golf. And who counted as the public? The word municipal is important in this story. Stevens Park was not built as a private country club. It belonged to the city of Dallas. Residents could pay a fee and play without joining a club or receiving an invitation. And that may not sound like a radical idea now, but golf had long been associated with exclusivity. Land, membership, social standing, and the right connections. A city-owned course offered a different model. You did not need to belong to the right club. You needed a set of clubs and the price of a round.
Contemporary accounts describe public golf as golf for the working man. The language is dated, but the distinction mattered. The municipal court opened the game to clerks, teachers, students, tradespeople, and families who were never going to join a private country club. Guides from the Depression era listed rounds at Stevens Park for well under $1. For a time, Oak Cliff had a private course nearby associated with the Dal Oak or El Tivoli Club. The public and private versions of golf existed almost beside one another. The private course disappeared and Stevens Park kept going.
But public ownership did not automatically mean equal access. Dallas Recreation operated within racial segregation. African American residents were directed toward separate and inferior facilities, and municipal golf was no exception. In 1957, after a course used by black golfers had closed and the alternatives were inadequate, there's a story about a group of black golfers who went to Stevens Park. They entered the clubhouse and asked to play. According to the history of the Dallas park system, they were admitted. There was no famous courtroom scene or widely remembered confrontation of that moment. And yes, this was not the end of the discrimination in Dallas or in golf, but it was one local moment when a public institution stopped enforcing part of the color line.
Once Stevens Park was established, it began producing golfers, not because it had a luxury academy, but because it was there and available, and close enough for young people to reach it. Kids could caddy, practice, work around the course, and play it repeatedly. Gus Moreland grew up near Stevens Park. He delivered newspapers, caddied, practiced there, and became one of the country's leading amateur golfers. He won major state and regional titles and received an invitation to the early Masters tournament. And Moreland was not an isolated success. Stevens Park became closely connected to Sunset High School, which developed one of the most remarkable golf traditions in Texas. Its players included Betty Jameson and Betty Mims Danoff, who later became two of the 13 founders of the LPGA. Earl Stewart Jr. became a major amateur champion and professional, and then John January won the PGA Championship. Jimmy Powell became a state high school champion and later returned to work at Stevens Park before building a successful career on the senior tour.
That list is extraordinary, and it shows that talent doesn't just appear when elite institutions decide to cultivate it. Sometimes talent grows because a public course is close enough for a kid to reach it. A paper route crosses it, a caddy job creates an opening, or a coach organizes a team. Stevens Park also hosted women's competitions during a period when many golf institutions excluded women or treated their play as secondary. And sure, the course still carried the prejudices of its time, but it also created openings that private clubs often refused to provide. To put it simply, Stevens Park was where Oak Cliff learned to play golf.
The course did not remain a rough 9-hole layout for long. Oak Cliff civic groups kept pressing for expansion. The city acquired more land, and in 1927, Stevens Park became an 18-hole course with grass greens. This was a big change. Grass greens required irrigation, maintenance, labor, and money. They signaled that Stevens Park was becoming a permanent civic facility rather than a temporary experiment. During the Depression, federal work programs brought construction into public parks. At Stevens Park, workers built and improved stone structures, bridges, benches, pathways, landscaping, and other features. That stonework still gives that area much of its visual identity. The walls, bridges, buildings, trees, and fairways speak to the same architectural language, local stone, low structures, and work fitted to that land.
In 1941, Dallas acquired additional property near St. Cecilia Catholic Church and built a new clubhouse. But the country was moving toward war. Labor was leaving public projects for military service and wartime industry. Some local research suggests that city prisoners were actually being used on some resurfacing and reconstruction work as labor became scarce, which is kind of a jarring detail. A beautiful public landscape can carry complicated histories of who was allowed to enjoy it and who was compelled to build it.
By the end of the 20th century, Stevens Park had survived, but surviving and thriving are two different things. Drainage and irrigation were failing, erosion affected the creek, trees and vegetation changed sightlines, and decades of repairs had accumulated. The course needed more than another patch. Neighbors and golf supporters organized for full reinvestment. The course closed for a major redesign led by John Cooligan and Trey Kemp and reopened in 2011. The renovation rebuilt greens, tees, fairways, drainage, irrigation, bunkers, landscaping, and erosion control. But the most important choice was what they did not do. They did not flatten Stevens Park into a generic modern golf course.
They kept the creek. They used the hills. They preserved the strange corridors and skyline views. The routing changed substantially, but the argument of the original course remained. The land should lead. So where did the nickname Little Augusta come from? There doesn't appear to be one official naming moment. It is more of a reputation that settled onto the course. And the comparison is visual. Old trees and rolling fairways, landscaping and elevation. A course that can look especially vivid when everything is green and flowering.
But the comparison only goes so far. Augusta National is one of the most exclusive private clubs in the world. Stevens Park is owned by the city of Dallas. One was created as a private sanctuary. The other was built to make golf available for the public. The difference makes the nickname more interesting. Stevens Park offers some of the beauty people associate with the famous private course without requiring membership in an elite institution.
Neighbors walk its edges. Children recognize the stone bridges and trees before they know what a par 4 is. People stop to photograph downtown, and when snow falls, the hills become sledding territory. So Little Augusta may describe how the place looks, but it does not fully explain why people care. People care because it's theirs. And then there's one more hidden layer. We mentioned it briefly earlier. Near the 6th tee stands a historical marker for La Réunion, the French, Belgian, and Swiss colony established on the bluffs west of Dallas in the 1850s. The cooperative colony collapsed within a few years. most physical traces disappeared, but its marker now stands inside Stevens Park.
Which means a golfer can pass through one Oak Cliff dream while being reminded of another. First, European colonists looked at these bluffs and imagined a cooperative society. Then developers imagined residential estates. City planners imagined a connected park system. Oak Cliff leaders imagined a public golf course. And modern neighbors imagined permanent green space inside a growing city. The land keeps attracting plans. Some survive, some disappear, some leave only a name or a marker. La Reunion failed as a colony. Stevens Park succeeded as a municipal landscape. But both stories begin with people standing above the Trinity, looking at the difficult ground and deciding it could become something more.
The history of Stevens Park Golf Course can be told as a simple golf story. A city receives land, a 9-hole course opens, it expands to 18, sand greens become grass, the course ages, the city renovates, people keep playing. All of that is true, but the local story has some roots.
Annie Stevens was honoring her parents when she made the land donation. She was also building a neighborhood. Dallas wanted a golf course, but the original land was too small. The designers wanted golf holes, but the creeks, bluffs, roads, trees, and gullies kept getting in the way. And instead of removing every problem, the course absorbed them. That is why Stevens Park feels so specific. It could not have been built exactly that way anywhere else. Even the places where the course feels squeezed or evidence of how it came to be exist.
But for more than a century, different generations have found different reasons to need Stevens Park. Either it's golf or natural beauty, at times a neighborhood development, and for many a place to live. And maybe that is the real meaning of Little Augusta. Not that Oak Cliff owns a small version of someone else's famous course, but that a public landscape built with limited money on stubborn ground can develop a beauty and identity entirely of its own.
Hey, thanks for tuning in to this episode of The Hidden City. We hope you discovered something about Oak Cliff that you didn't know. If you enjoyed the show, I hope you subscribe to it on YouTube and then follow us on any of the podcasting platforms. Also, if you enjoyed it, please share with a friend, and thanks so much for tuning in.